Yo, Ronaldo, what's up? I'm glad to jump back into Genesis with you. I'm glad to be here with those in the Village campus at Clemens Union Cross. I'm really happy that you guys can study with us. Talking about the origins of all humanity, of all people, is a big topic. And so when we're thinking through this, there's a lot going on, but I want to try and lock into just a few quick moments in the scriptures that highlight what's going on with the origins of all things. So if you look at, real quick, guys, I'm going to tie this back in, but instead of looking at Genesis, turn to Romans, and we're going to look at Romans 1, 19 to 20. Give you a second. If you don't have your Bibles, pause this. Go get them. All right, get your notes, get your pens, all that stuff. All right, Romans 1, 19 to 20. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. This is a really simple idea, and it really encapsulates a lot of why we're even having this conversation. You and I look at the people around us and the world around us and we say, where did this come from? Why did this come into being? What is this? This planet, this people group, this church, how does this happen? What are the origins of this? And so we're having this conversation because it is clear in everything we see that there's something going on behind the scenes. So the question is, what is it? And I think one of the most amazing parts of it is that without speaking audibly, even though God does speak audibly to us, without doing that, he communicates more about himself than we could ever even know. And I want to just go through a few things, and then I want you guys to take a minute and talk about this. I know it's Sunday morning, it's not small groups, but I want you just to have a little conversation. So real quick, when we look at creation, first of all, I think one of the most mind-blowing things about creation is the level of creativity that God has. Sometimes when I'm in a worship service, something like that, I see the worship leader and the musicians, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how are they so creative? But that isn't even close to the creativity that we see in creation. When we look outside and we see the flowers, and we see the planets, and we see the mountains, and we see the rivers, what God did when he made this universe broke the mold. So we know God is creative, and he doesn't have to tell us that at all. We know that in every way, he is uniquely creative. Then, number two, we see that God is just. Everything in nature has a balance. And this is, it's not to say that there is an imbalance and that we don't suffer more than some other people sometimes, or some of us don't have really hard moments. But every cause has an effect, right? And every effect has a cause. And when we do something bad, there are bad consequences. When we do something good, there are good consequences for the most part. You know what I'm saying? But the neat thing that we can learn about God, though, is that he is just, that he wants a balanced equity for his creation. He does not want one animal group or people group or plant to dominate everything. Okay, and the last thing that I want to note that I think we see really clearly in creation is that God is loving. Give me a second. I know that's a complicated thing to communicate without words, but I think it really is true. When we see the way, for me, it all boils down to the way that we and animals treat their young. I think there's just something that God built into creation. God could have made the universe in any way. He didn't have to make the universe so that when a species or an animal or a person has a child, they are helpless and have to be nurtured. I mean, imagine if there was a species that gave birth to a full-grown version of itself that already knew what it needed to know through DNA imprinting or whatever. You know, God could have done any of that, but the way he chose to make the world was that he would give animals and people children so that they could nurture them and grow them. How incredible is that? That's absolutely incredible. So pause the video. I want you to take just a few minutes and think about the world as you've seen it, the world as you've experienced it, and think, is there something that I can learn about God from the world around me? And then we're going to come back together. You can go ahead and pause the video. All right, cool. I'm glad you're back. Hopefully you guys had a good time talking about how you can see God in creation. But I want to highlight one more thing for you before you go. We're talking about the origins of all things. And so we made a clear case that that God is visible in creation, that everything displays his attributes. Now, the hardest thing about the creation account is the fall, right? Is the sin that we see Adam committing and Eve committing, and that causing this kind of domino effect of evil in the universe and in the world. And how do we reconcile that, right, with the way that we see God in everything? These are really big, huge questions. But the truth is that we learn a lot about God from that. Think about the responses that God could possibly have had to his creation, absolutely perfect, and then he hands it over to man, and then man breaks the one rule he gave them. The responses of God could have been many horrible things, right? They could have been, well, scratch the whole thing, destroy it. It could have been wipe humanity out and give creation to the angels. It could have been any number of things. But that's not what God does. Instead of seeing the mistake that Adam and Eve made and despairing or letting his wrath destroy all things, or a lot of the responses that we might have, God doubles down. This is where I want to encourage you guys today. I've had a striking number of conversations lately about students and people that are just struggling, that are in really hard situations. And probably the most amazing thing about the origins of our world that we see in the Bible, and what it teaches us about God, is that when you and I are in the middle of immense struggle, and when that person has abandoned us, or we've committed some awful sins, and we don't know where that's going to take us, and we're scared and we're anxious, or someone's hurting us, and we don't know what to do about it. When we're in the middle of these situations, God doesn't say, well, that's what your sin will get you. He doesn't say, well, looks like this one's checked off the list. Let me erase him out of the Lamb's book of life. God doesn't react this way. And we can tell right in the creation account, how does God react? God doubles down. God says, I'm going to get into the mud with you. I'm going to work through this. And it is going to take, Adam had no idea, but it was going to take thousands of years, thousands of people that God has to weep with and cry with and suffer with as they lie and steal and cheat and break his commandments, abandon him, reject him, worship other gods, commit adultery and do all kinds of crazy stuff. The flood was still coming, right? Man had to go so far down a dark path that God had to wipe out a large section of them, right? This is a long, hard journey, and God knew it was coming, and he could have easily said, no, thank you. And whatever you're dealing with this week, it dawns on us, it does. We think maybe we're not good enough, or maybe God doesn't want to help me because I did this or I did that. Whatever you're dealing with, God is willing to go the longest and the most difficult roads to draw us back to himself and to draw us back to perfection. We came from a perfect, creative, just, immensely loving God, and he is drawing us all back to himself. A lot of people have this conversation so that they can fight about where we came from. We need to have this conversation of origins so we can know for sure where we're going. I really can't wait to dig into this passage and Genesis 1. We're going to be talking more about Genesis 1 and how God created everything this week in small groups. But I want you guys to know that our God is a God that will never, ever give up on you. And he's been that way since the beginning of all things. Love you guys.